Parker, a member of the Bountiful Centennial Committee. She's looking through the Centennial book, Dwellings. It's enlightening to learn about these 91 historic homes built in Bountiful before and soon after its incorporation as a city in 1892. It's been our hope that this collection will motivate people to better appreciate these old treasures. Laurel Van Orman's home, one of these old treasures, is tucked away behind lush trees and shrubbery. It's not easily seen from the street. At first, one is almost unaware of its existence. The first part of this old house was started in 1869, and rooms were added as needed. 41 years ago, Wilford and Laurel Van Orman bought this old house. Instead of tearing it down, they saw its potential in accommodating their 11 children. They divided rooms, added more in the basement and on the second story, and ended up with 14 rooms. Laurel is a highly creative and artistic person and has captured the past and made this into a comfortable period home, as you shall see.
It's been my privilege to be in Laurel's home on a number of occasions, and I'm delighted to have you with me today and come and see some of the beautiful things that she has from the past and has decorated her home. Come with me and let's see if Laurel is here.
Well, hello, Colleen. Come in. What brings you here?
Laurel, we appreciate your letting us come into your home today and see some of these things that I have appreciated for many years. Your entry hall always kind of gives me a feeling of warmth as I come into the house. Could you explain some of the things here for us?
It belonged to my mother, and I have very few things that belonged to her because she died when I was just a little girl. But this little locket here was hers, and that tintype picture, and the picture in the center is a picture of her. And the other things are things that I think she may have used at that period of time.
This picture interests me, Laurel. Could you tell me about it? It's a picture of the home, I presume.
It was taken in 1919, and that's a buggy in front of it. And really the outside of the house hasn't changed very much since then. This is an old trunk that I bought at a garage sale, and I just used it here in the dining room. The plate rail was in this house when we came here, and the plates on the plate rail are plates that I painted myself. This little table is a little table that I had refinished, and the cloth on it is 100 years old. It is knitted instead of being crocheted. It's knitted on needles about the size of a darning needle. That picture is a picture of my parents. It was taken when they were married in 1900, and the other picture is of myself and the first time I met my husband. This is an old-fashioned shaving stand, and it had the candles on the sides there so people could see when they were shaving. And this would be before they used electricity. These old-fashioned flowers are cosmos, and they're flowers that people used on their tables 100 years ago. And they're still beautiful, and they grow just like weeds. You never have to plant them. They reseed themselves every year. Speaking about things that grow in your yard, this is a wreath my daughter and I made for one of my granddaughters when they were married. All of the foliage in there came out of the yard. If you'll notice, everything that hangs on my walls are things that have been made by ourselves. This picture of the old fiddler was made for me by my daughter Shirley a few years ago. My father was an old-time fiddler and was still playing the violin when he was 85 years old. This spinning wheel I brought back from Canada one trip that I made up there. I got it at the Hooterite colony. And it's a workable spinning wheel, but I don't ever intend to use it. The reason they got rid of it is because they started making nylon stockings, and when wool stockings wore out too fast, and I never intend to use it, but I've always liked the looks of it. And hanging on the side of it there is a pair of wool corders. These are a couple of Bibles. One of them belonged to my father that has his name in it, and the other belonged to my husband's father. This Bible right here was my husband's, and he signed his name in that the day before he died.
Laurel, I have never seen such huge pine cones. Where in the world do you find these?
Oh, these came out of California, but some of them I've gathered myself, but most of them I've purchased.
We've invited Muriel Hawkins to join with us today to show some of her beautiful collection of vintage clothing. Muriel, thanks so much for being with us. You look beautiful. I hope you're going to explain about your outfit and some other clothes you brought with you.
That's fine. I'm going to show you authentic styles from the 1890s. Elizabeth Parker Marsh wears the type of hat that was all the rage in that decade, and it is made out of braided straw, lace, and with stand-up ribbons. Her coat was purchased in 1890 by my grandmother and is made of what they called plush, and it's a heavy velvet. The closures are decorated with heads of stone martins with beads for eyes. And the leg of mutton sleeve was the big look of the 90s, and that coat has it, and it's made very full in back so that it would go over any size of bustle. I'll take it off for you. Her bodice is decorated with many rows of double tucks, very tiny tucks, and then the sleeves have single rows of tucks. And this is a unique style because it has a tie that is worked right into this design and is edged with ecru trim, and then this has braid tied into knots for decoration. Now, Brigham Young asked the women of Utah not to wear the big overskirt type bustles that we see in Western movies because it wasted too much material. But the Mormon women did not want to be out of style, so they wore a pad underneath their dresses, and then their dresses cut extra full in back. And that was the way they got the bustle look. And this was used also elsewhere in the country. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sylvia Hawkins Vallis, my daughter, is wearing her hair in the Gibson girl look that was all the rage of the 90s. This was the hairstyle that was popular. Her cape is of 3 circular tiers with edges trimmed with jet beads. And of course the decorative trim here, and the jet bead goes around the edge and down the front, and then there's a decorative clasp. Now the collar on her dress was given to me by a relative, and it was from the 90s styles, and I found a picture of a dress to make to go with it. And the picture came from one being worn by Frances Folsom Cleveland, who was wife of President Grover Cleveland, who was the President of the United States when Utah became a state in 1896. And it, of course, as you saw, had a full bustle underneath and velvet and jet bead trim. My own outfit is topped with a jacket made out of Battenberg lace. And this was done by women in Europe in their homes, just made out of braid and twisted. And they filled in the larger spots with taffeta and decorated it with buttons covered with thread that they would cover with sewing thread. Then my bodice is called lingerie blouse, and it's made with many tiny little tucks and inset lace. And this became so popular that whole dresses were made out of it for about the next 20 years. One feature is the buttons are crocheted, covered, and they used sewing thread to crochet with. And then my skirt is edged on the bottom with several rows of top stitching and ruffles. I have one more outfit to show you. Have you noticed the predominant use of black? But that's really what they did, and they felt like it showed the dirt less, and they had a difficult time cleaning their outfits. This is a wool suit trimmed with velvet and braid and buttons, and it was owned by the daughter of Charles W. Penrose, whose cabin is preserved in Farmington. This is the best look of the 90s. Look at this large full sleeve at the top for the Lake of Mutton style. And these cuffs are very elaborate with peaks on back and front and edged with a braid. Here the design is repeated in a false collar up here. The braid continues around to the back. Notice up here on the shoulders the peaks of the braid. And then this is also repeated in the double trim of braid around the bottom of the skirt. Heavy wool, it's really good quality. The lady thought that, their descendants thought that she had bought it in Chicago on a buying trip with her husband because he went back to Chicago to conventions.
We so much appreciate your coming, Muriel, and showing us these beautiful clothes. And Sylvia, Elizabeth, thank you for being the models.
It's been our pleasure to be here.
This room was once used as a bedroom, but I don't need as many bedrooms now as I used to. And this rug on the floor, I made this year since Christmas. It takes a long time to make a rug like this. It takes about 6 hours to put one braid around the outside of it. I guess that's why very many people don't have them. Made a couple of new rounds for it and put a new rocker on it and painted it to match this room. The glass on the windows, when I repapered this room a few years ago, I decided to put these little shelves and put glass on them instead of curtains. This secretary is like a lot of pieces of furniture you used to see in older homes. I purchased this piece of furniture years ago at an antique store in Lehigh. I paid $85 for it, but now they're worth about $500 when they're refinished and have the beveled glass in them. The quilt is called the postage stamp quilt, and it is hand-pieced, and it is sewn by hand, not sewn on a sewing machine. The quilt on the couch is a pineapple pattern. This is an old trunk I refinished, and the top of it I put a few pieces that had been in the paper and decoupaged them on there so that they would be preserved. And it's a good idea for someone that would like to do something like that.
I love this little shelf with the miniatures of the china, the glassware, and the little doll clothes, baby clothes. Could you tell us about those, Laurel?
Well, I decided a few years ago to paint a tea set for each of my grandchildren, and I haven't given them to them yet. I've got about 20 painted, 20 little sets painted, and that's just some of them. And these little doll clothes are just clothes that I thought were cute and hung up there. This is a small bedroom, and this bedspread is made out of some old doilies that I had. Some were made by some of my relatives, and I just put them on different pieces of material and quilted this bedspread. It's a good way to preserve doilies if you have them that belong to your grandmother. notice there's several trunks in here, and the reason is because these old houses didn't have cupboards or didn't have clothes closets to store things in. This one here has all my Christmas things in. This one's full of dolls. That one over there, my son sent it home from Hong Kong when he was on a mission in Hong Kong to his girlfriend. But she married somebody else, so she gave me the chest. This little cradle in the corner I made for my youngest daughter, Vicki. I made it in a shop class at Bountiful High. It's made out of cherry wood. That's a little puff quilt on the top of it. This is the high chair that my children all used when they were little. That little bed in the corner was made for one of my son's little girls. This bed is a bed that I was born in. I had a nephew bring it down from Canada, and I was so thrilled when he took this out of the old ranch house and brought it down to me. It isn't beautiful, but it is the bed I was born in. This quilt that's on it I made while I worked as a costume mistress for the Utah Civic Ballet. And these are scraps of material that we sewed costumes for in there. That quilt never cost me a dime, and it's worth several $100s. All of the furniture in this room is bird's eye maple, except that wardrobe, and it's just maple. But when these older homes were built, they didn't have clothes closets, and that's where people kept their clothes. And if you had enough clothes to fill that little wardrobe, you was pretty lucky. People have 10 times that much. Now they have to have garage sales to get rid of the old ones so they can get new ones.
Laurel, that's beautiful on top of that wardrobe. What is that?
That is hydrangea, and you pick it in the fall. That was picked after it had snow on it, and I dried it over the furnace, and it keeps a little bit of color in it. That picture was given to my mother by the midwife that attended her when I was born, and I've always had it in my possession. This quilt is called Grandmother's Flower Garden, and it is hand-pieced. I did not piece it. I quilted it, but I didn't piece it. The Hoosier cupboard is a cupboard that was in most people's kitchens before they started to build built-in cabinets. Everything that you needed in your kitchen was kept in that one little cupboard. Behind that old churn is a door that opens, and it has a flour sifter in it. I have always liked to raise plants, and this particular plant in the corner is called the spider plant. And it's a descendant of the plant that was brought across the plains by the Mormon pioneers when they came here. This ceiling was put in here after we moved here, these beams were, and I wallpapered that ceiling, and I'll tell you, I'll never wallpaper it again. I had to put a couple of picnic tables in here and then put the benches on top of the picnic tables, and to get a strip of paper that far and hold it that far above your head when you're not a professional, it's no small job, so that's the color it'll always be. And this rack that these pots and pans hang on, my daughter Vicki and I made and put up there.
Uh-oh, we have a guest. Laurel tells us this sly bird darts in quite often when the front door is open.
I have cooked on a coal stove all of my life. You have to know more about how to keep your coal stove fired than you need to know about cooking in order to cook on them. You can either burn things till they're black, or it takes a long time to get the right temperature. And the stove I had in Canada before I was married didn't have a thermometer on the front of it. You had to just put your hand in to feel how warm it was. These little things come down, and if someone isn't home on time for supper, you can set your food there and keep it warm without it getting too hot on the top of the stove. And the oven door was a favorite place for the kids to sit when they come in from sleigh riding, or if your feet are cold, you put them in the oven.
Bird's trying to steal the show. Hey, he's gotta go. Bye-bye, Birdie.
This stove I purchased in an antique store in Lehi, Utah. And I know a man that has one exactly like it that he paid $5,000 for it. I only paid $800 for this, and it sure does work good in the wintertime. That little copper base was in a house that we rented one time in Salt Lake. It was down in the basement in the corner, and I've always thought it was beautiful. The little stool that it's on, I think, has once been a piano stool, but it doesn't have the top on it now. This is a workable treadle sewing machine that works just wonderful.
Are they built out of sewing machine drawers?
Yep, they sure are. They're just nailed onto the wall there. That's the advantage of having old walls like this. Don't matter if you drive nails in them.
Oh, where did you get this wonderful old paneling?
It came from an old house that was just about torn down up in Randolph, Utah. My boys went up there and knocked it down and brought these big old logs down, and we lined the inside of it with those logs. The grandchildren are always needing sunbonnets to wear at some of their primary parties, and so rather than trying to find them and borrow them, I just decided to make a few so they'd always be handy. This cupboard I was lucky enough to buy here in Bountiful at a garage sale. It's golden oak, but when I bought it, it was black as Toby's heel. You couldn't even tell there was designs on it. Took a lot of work to get it back to its natural golden oak beauty. This is the sewing machine that I've always sewn on. It is just a single stitch machine, and I've used it for 55 years. And I've only had it in a repair shop once, and I hardly ever oil it. But it has sewn 1,000,000 miles. And this room really is my factory. It's usually in a mess. There's quilt blocks and rags for rugs and children's clothes, and I spend a lot of time out here sewing. I burn coal oil lamps a lot in the wintertime. The home that I was raised in never had electricity or plumbing, and anytime I light a coal oil lamp, it reminds me of where I was raised up in the old farm in Canada. These dolls are all rag dolls, all homemade dolls. That's the kind that children used to play with long before they had Madame Alexander dolls. This is Carly Van Orman. She loves to swing on this rope swing. The higher you push her, the better she likes it. She doesn't have a single bit of fear. Okay. This is Willie Van Orman, and his dad and his grandfather Hammond built this treehouse for the children a couple of years ago. They play in it often, and they stay in it overnight. We built this root cellar years ago to store fruit and vegetables in. I keep my potatoes and apples and all the canned fruit that I can in this little root cellar. And we built it out of the rocks right out of the creek here.
When we dug the hole for the root cellar, we were digging and saw a little piece of blue, and I thought it was a piece of blue glass, and we kept carefully digging around it and unearthed this little vase. I didn't know what it was at the time, but later on I took it to a man that I knew in Salt Lake, and he told me that it was a German cobalt burial urn, and the picture of this little child on the front of it was undoubtedly the ashes of what was in the urn.
This fence was built by my son and his friend when we used to keep a horse here. We kept a horse for 30 years. This little cabin was built in 1983 on the creek right here after the flood. One of my grandsons proposed to his wife out in this cabin, and we use it as a guest house. The teenagers use it real often. This bathtub is an old metal bathtub that people used to use before they had indoor plumbing. And the little outhouse over here goes along with the cabin. Of course, if you don't have indoor plumbing, it's necessary to have an outhouse.
As we leave this priceless home, we thank Laurel Van Orman for her hospitality as she has shared some of this past. We thank Mariel Hawkins for letting us enjoy part of her vast collection of vintage clothing, and for Sylvia and Elizabeth who helped with the modeling. And we hope you have enjoyed this step back into history, another glimpse into Bountiful's past.